Yep. So we completed up to payment process request. We have seen how to automate the payment process. Now we'll pick the topic called as prepayment invoice. If you want to give advance to supplier, first we have to create prepayment invoice. With the help of prepayment invoice, you can process advance to supplier. As per payables application, we cannot make the payment without any invoice. Even if you are going to give advance to supplier, invoice is required. What purpose we are creating invoice, that we have to record? We are going to create invoice for the purpose of advance to the supplier, that we have to record in the system. For that same invoice, we will process the payment that we call as prepayment to supplier. We'll see that what process, what are the steps are involved. So when you give advance to supplier, first we have to create invoice, how much amount, how much advance we want to pay. Create prepayment invoice. Say you want to pay $25,000. Create prepayment invoice to the 25. This is just invoice. Now you have to pay for it. Process payment to prepayment invoice. The same amount you will pay. You don't pay partial amount. How much advance you want to give, accordingly create invoice and pay that amount. After making the payment, that amount would be available. That amount would be available with the supplier. Whenever you purchase from the supplier, you can use that amount. After giving $25,000 advance, say you purchase from supplier for 10,000. When you purchase from supplier for 10,000, we get invoice from supplier. The same you record as a standard invoice. So create a standard invoice with the 10,000. So we have 25,000 with our supplier as an advance amount. Now again, you don't need to pay. From 25, we can use 10,000. That adjustment we call as application. Okay, we apply, say apply prepayment on standard invoice. So apply prepayment on standard invoice. When you apply the prepayment on the standard invoice, so the amount, the outstanding will be closed, 10,000 will be closed. Still we will have 15,000 with the supplier. So this is the process we have to follow. Create prepayment invoice, process payment, the amount would be available. Once the amount is available, create the standard invoice. Wherever you get invoice from the supplier for purchases, record in the system. Apply the prepayment on the standard invoice. How much you will apply? You will apply 10,000. Applying 10,000 here from available amount, 10,000 would be reduced. The remaining available amount would be 15,000. That 15,000 you may use when you purchase from the same supplier in the future. So this is the complete life cycle of prepayment invoice. Here, when you create the standard invoice, if prepayments are available in the system, when you create the standard invoice, if prepayment is available with the same supplier, to display that information, we have to enable one checkbox in the invoice options. If you enable the checkbox, whenever you create invoice against the same supplier, if any prepayment is available with that supplier, system will display. System will display as prepayments are available with the same supplier. The checkbox name is, you can take as enable. Okay, enable on checkbox called as display available prepayments during invoice entry, or say show. Show available prepayments during invoice entry. It means when you are creating invoice, if any prepayments are available with that supplier, it should display so that you can take the decision to adjust that prepayment amount on the invoice or to pay that invoice separately. So first we'll go and enable the checkbox. When you create the standard invoice, it will display available prepayments with the same supplier. Fine. So let's create prepayment invoice. Create invoice. Supplier is Alt IRC supplier 1. I'm giving the invoice number as PP1, prepayment 1, $25,000. Invoice type is prepayment invoice. Okay, invoice type is prepayment invoice. Now go to lines. So if invoice type is prepayment, system will take prepayment account from common options automatically. If you provide the prepayment account in the supplier site level, it will take from site. If you don't provide a supplier site, it takes from common options. Okay, now in our case, it is deriving this prepayment account from common options. Reason we didn't provide any prepayment account at supplier site level. Enter line amount $25,000 and submit invoice for validation. And another point, go to show more. Here we have one checkbox. Allow prepayment application. Allow prepayment application. If the checkbox is enabled, system will treat this prepayment as a temporary prepayment. If this checkbox is enabled, system will understand this prepayment is temporary. If it is a temporary, you can use it. You can adjust against the future purchases. If you disable this checkbox, system will treat it as a permanent prepayment. This is like security deposit. You cannot use whenever you purchase from the same supplier. Okay. So by default, it is a temporary. And again, on or after this date, this prepayment would be available to use. Okay, you can use today or later. So this prepayment would be available to use. If you disable the checkbox, system will treat it as a permanent prepayment. Permanent prepayment you cannot adjust. It is kind of security deposit to the supplier. That is another note. Now submit invoice for validation. When you submit invoice for validation, system will update the invoice status as unpaid. You see, if you validate any standard invoice, debit or credit memo, we have seen the status will turn into validated. Now see, status is unpaid. Once we validate the prepayment invoice, the status will turn into unpaid. That means this invoice is not yet paid. Okay, not yet paid. Why system is showing as unpaid? The invoice what we are creating just to give the advance only. Normal invoices you may have a due dates and all, but when you create the prepayment invoice, always we have to use immediate payment terms. Whenever you want to give advance, create invoice and do pay that amount. So always we use immediate payment term. Reality, no payment terms for prepayment. As per our system, payment terms are mandatory for every invoice. You should take immediate payment terms. Once you validate the prepayment invoice status is unpaid, now we'll go and process the payment. Go to invoice actions, say pay in full. Select payment process profile. Select payment document. Submit. After making the payment for prepayment, you see the status. Okay, here you see the status available. That means this $25,000 available from this prepayment invoice to use available. Okay, amount is available, you can use it. Now, we created prepayment invoice and we processed payment. Let's create standard invoice with the 10,000 with the same supplier. Click on save and create next. Supplier name is Alt I and C. I'm creating standard invoice 1. 10,000. So we receive 10,000 invoice from the same supplier. And go to lines, enter line amount. Validate. Submit invoice for validation. In the invoice options, okay, we have to enable one checkbox. Okay, in the invoice options, we have to enable one checkbox. So if you enable the checkbox, system will display here. Okay, system will display supplier number level one bell icon. Now it is not showing because we didn't enable. Okay, we didn't enable. So the checkbox, that is the reason it is not showing. We'll go and enable. Okay, we'll go and just validate this invoice. Just invoice is validated, it's not showing any bell icon. But still you can go and see available prepayments from here. Apply or unapply prepayments. If you go to that, it will show $25,000 available. This is okay. If you go to invoice actions, if you click on apply or unapply, you will be able to see. But without taking this navigation, if you want to see from here itself, we have to enable that checkbox. Okay, just say save and close, or else open another tab. Okay, just open one more tab to manage the setups. Go to invoice options. Select our business unit. Okay, here if you scroll little down, you see prepayment section. Whenever you create the prepayment invoice, which payment term system should select that you can set as a default, and here enable show available prepayments during invoice entry. Settlement days, if you give 10 days, after 10 days only that prepayment would be available to apply. Okay, if you want to set a restriction on prepayment, every prepayment which you create, you can give settlement days as a like a certain amount of days, like 10 days or 5 days. Not required. If you don't provide any settlement days, immediately you will be able to use the prepayment. Yep. So enable that checkbox and say save and close. Now go to invoice workbench. We created invoice as STD1. So this is the invoice we created. Now see, it is showing bell icon. Available prepayments are 25,000 because we enable that checkbox and the invoice option is showing Now, as a business user, you can take the decision to use these available prepayments or to pay separately for this invoice. So you can see here, now you may take decision to apply the prepayment on this invoice. We created standard invoice. Now we'll see how to apply the prepayment on standard invoice. So to apply the prepayment, available prepayment on this standard invoice, go to invoice actions, click on apply or unapply prepayment. You can apply. If you want to unapply whatever you are applying, yes, that function also you can perform from the same page. So we have apply or unapply prepayments here. Select. So prepayment with the same supplier. Okay, with the same supplier, prepayment is available with the 25,000 available now. Click on apply. The invoice amount is 10,000. 10,000 will get applied and the remaining available amount is 15,000. You can click on done. If you want to unapply, you select this record, click on unapply. The application will be reversed. Again, you will have a 25,000. Your invoice will have a due. Say done. We applied. When you apply again, you have to submit for validation. Submit for validation and validated. If you click on validated status, you see amount is paid. How you paid? By applying the prepayment. Reality, we didn't pay for this invoice. Prepayment already we have that we are adjusting on this invoice. That's how this invoice is closed. Okay. So paid means closed. It's not open. Open means unpaid, outstanding. So that's how we can create the prepayment invoice and we can process. We can have a standard invoice and the same prepayment amount can be adjusted against the standard invoice. Yep. So that's what we have to understand. To see the available prepayments during invoice entry, we should enable the relevant checkbox in invoice options. Okay. So this checkbox we have to enable in invoice options. So that's all about prepayment story. Now we'll see withholding tax. Withholding tax. It's very simple to understand. When organization pay salaries to the employees, they hold certain tax amount. The remaining amount they pay in the form of salary. The amount what they are holding is we call as TDS. As an organization, as an employer, they deduct the tax amount, rest of amount they pay to the employee. Why they are deducting and paying? Employee is not a registered entity. Employee is not a registered entity. There is no guarantee employee will take the responsibility to pay the tax amount to government if company is paying to the employees. That is the reason for any entities, okay, any entities which is unregistered, ideally we don't need to pay the tax amount. So if you pay the tax amount, they may pay, may not pay. That is the reason tax amount need to be holded by organization. Behalf of employee, organization should pay the tax amount to government. Not only in case of employee, in other certain business cases, say we are taking some services from the contractor. If you are making the payment to contractor, as a company, we are responsible to hold the tax amount and we pay to the government, or we are paying the rent to our office space. And you have to hold the tax amount and you have to pay to the government after certain slabs. So this is how, like, whenever we have to pay the tax amount, if the party is not registered, our vendor, or maybe person or individual, or you can say organization. Okay, if not registered entity, we have to hold the tax amount and tax amount we have to pay to the government, and remaining amount only we have to pay to our vendor. So that concept we call as withholding tax. Okay, we call as withholding tax. So what we call here as a TDS in US, they call as withholding tax in other countries also. The wherever the scenario matches, where we have to hold the tax amount and we pay to the government, rest of amount will release to our supplier. That concept we call as withholding tax. So mostly unregistered entities. Unregistered entities. In some countries, even they are registered also. Okay, the entity may be registered, still as an organization we have to hold that amount. It depends which country you are just for which country you are implementing, accordingly you have to do. But we have to understand the functionality. That's all. If you take just KSA Saudi, there say there is some registered entity who are providing consulting services. The local government they'll hold the tax amount. They don't pay the tax amount to you if you are running your business in Saudi, like providing the consulting services. Okay, they hold the tax amount and they pay the remaining amount, and in depending on the country. Okay, depending on the country. So mostly it is like unregistered entities. When you are making the payment, you have to hold the tax amount, remaining amount you can pay. The holded amount you have to pay to government. So that's all about the withholding tax concept. If you want to pay the tax amount to the government, what you are holding from the your actual suppliers, call it as standard supplier. So we have to create the tax authority in our books as a supplier. We have to create the tax authority as a supplier in our books. Without supplier definition, you cannot make any payments to any party. Fine, we'll see what setups are required, or else before that, we'll take the case. Say we are going to create invoice with 1 lakh. And whenever, and say on this invoice, say 10% is the withholding tax applicable. 10% withholding tax is applicable on the invoice amount. The moment you validate the invoice, system will calculate withholding tax and it will create withholding tax invoice with the tax authority. So when you validate, we can set the trigger point when system should calculate withholding tax and when it should create the invoice also. We'll see that as a part of setups. Mostly we just calculate and create withholding tax invoice at the time of invoice only, not at the time of payment. Okay, in the most of the countries that is not allowed. Only invoice creation time itself you have to create withholding tax invoice. So the moment you validate the invoice, system creates withholding tax. Okay, WHT, withholding tax invoice with tax authority name. Okay, 10% on 1 lakh, system will create 10,000. Okay, 10% on 1 lakh means 10,000, and here will pay 90,000 to standard supplier. Okay, this 10,000 will pay to tax authority. If supplier is registered entity, will pay total amount 1 lakh, including tax will pay 1 lakh, and supplier will hold that 90,000, and 10,000 our supplier will pay to tax authority behalf of us, since registered entity. If not non-registered entities, we have to hold and we have to pay to the government behalf of our supplier. since we are involved in the transaction. So this is the process. We create invoice, system will calculate the tax with the tax amount. It will create the separate invoice with the tax authority. And tax amount will pay to the tax authority. Remaining amount will pay to our standard supplier. If you want to pay to the tax authority, first we have to create tax authority as a supplier in our books. First we have to create tax authority as supplier. Same process, how to create supplier, the same process will follow. Only one parameter makes a difference. We'll see that. And we need to set up withholding tax options for our business unit. Within our business unit, we want to execute this use case, this scenario. So for our BU, we have to do this setup. That we call as withholding tax options. Say setup or say configure. Setup withholding tax options. And how much percentage of tax is applicable, that we have to define as a tax codes. So create withholding tax codes. You may create one code or multiple code. Those codes need to be assigned to supplier. For which supplier withholding tax is applicable, that we have to assign. Okay, we need to assign the tax codes. Within the tax code, we'll give the percentage. How much percentage of the tax need to be calculated, that we specify within the tax code. So if you want to assign that, we have to assign this withholding tax codes to suppliers. For which supplier withholding tax is applicable, we have to hold the tax that we have to assign. If you want to assign withholding tax code to supplier, it is not possible directly. That is the reason what we do is we group the tax codes. We group the tax codes. By grouping the tax codes, you can assign. You may have one code or multiple codes. We have to create withholding tax group. So directly codes cannot be assigned to suppliers. Only tax codes can be assigned in the form of group. So we'll create withholding tax group. We create withholding tax group, and within the group, what we do, we'll list out all the tax codes. It may be one or multiple, we have to list out. Okay. So here, when we are talking as a withholding tax group. The same you can call as classification also. Both are same. Withholding tax group or withholding tax classification. Both are same. So we have to create. After creating withholding tax group or classification, we need to assign withholding tax group to applicable suppliers. You have 100 suppliers. Out of 100 suppliers, withholding tax is applicable only for 2 suppliers. 2 vendors are unregistered vendors. So we have to assign to those suppliers. Say assign withholding tax group to supplier. So these are the setups we have to perform, so that whenever you create invoice and validate, if withholding tax is applicable, system will calculate the withholding tax and it will create withholding tax invoice with the tax authority, and you can set the trigger point when system should calculate and create withholding tax invoice. The trigger point you can set at the time of withholding tax options configuration. We'll see that. First, we'll go and create supplier.
Lakshman, one question.
Yep.
Do they have the tax exemption for the suppliers?
Yes. If you want to set exemptions, exceptions, any advanced functionalities, you have to go and set up additional configuration, the fusion tax. Okay. This is straightforward. Any additional requirements, those you can set from the fusion tax itself. Yeah, not directly from the payments. Fine. Now we'll go and see how to just complete all these configurations which will support this process. Let's create supplier. Go to suppliers task list, create supplier. Supplier name is Alt INC Withholding Tax Authority. So US Withholding Tax Authority. Okay, business relationship. Always spend authorized. Tax organization type. So government agency. Say create. So based on the inputs provided, system creates profile. Now, how system will understand the supplier as tax authority? For system understanding, okay, we have to select supplier type as tax authority. We have to select supplier type as tax authority. Value here. I think in this environment it is missing. No worries, we'll see. So first we will complete. Okay. So go to addresses. Just click on create. Say withholding tax address. And select postal code. And what purpose we are going to use this address? Only remit to. We never place orders to this tax authority, only to make the payment. So enable only remit to. So save and close. Create site for the same address. Select address. Site name is withholding tax. Save the site definition. And set default invoice and payment currency for this tax authority site. In which currency you are going to make the payment as well as invoice creation. Set default payment method. Go to site assignments. Click on auto paid assignments. So save and close. So profile level, okay, profile level, it should open the values like tax authority. It's not showing as a tax authority. If you select tax authority, then this supplier would be available in the relevant or tax configuration. Okay. Seems to that is just missing in this environment. Fine. Fine. So we created supplier, but we should select supplier type as a tax authority. If you don't select supplier type as a tax authority, the same supplier will not be available to map with a withholding tax configuration. So for that, in this environment, seems to somebody disabled it. Okay, seems to somebody disabled. So we can go and enable. By default, that should be available. So we'll just go and enable it. So go to task called as supplier type lookups. The task name is manage supplier type lookup. Here, all the supplier types should be available. If you want to add, you can add new supplier types also. Only few somebody just enabled, rest disabled. By default, all should be enabled. Here, look for tax authority. Here is the tax authority. Enable it. Enable as a enable lookup value called as tax authority. Save and close. Okay. And cross check what Oracle is providing that we have to use ideally. It's only one. Yes. The same you have to enable. Okay. So this value is provided by Oracle. It has a functionality behind it. They written the programming with that value, saying that if this value is selected for any supplier, it should be available in relevant tax configuration. That's how it
I
works.
think these things should be seeded one, right? It should not be allowed for enable or disablement.
Correct. They allowed. Yeah. Certain values they allow. Certain values they allow. So if you are not dealing with that such kind of information, why to display at supplier creation time? That is the reason they allow. That is valid point, but there is a reason, right? Fine. Now we'll go back to the supplier definition. Manage suppliers. Find our supplier. Alt I and C. Withholding tax authority. Click on edit. And now select supplier type as a tax authority. We enable tax authority. Here it is populated. Select and save and close. So selecting supplier type as a tax authority is mandatory if you want to implement withholding tax. Done. So we create a tax authority as supplier. Now we'll go and configure withholding tax options. So go to our implementation project, search for withholding tax options. Here directly you can see the task. Manage tax reporting under withholding tax options. This is the task we use to set up. The full task name is manage tax reporting under withholding tax options. So click on, go to task icon. And we are setting up at BU level. Okay, withholding tax options we are setting at BU level. And here you can specify event class. Event class is nothing but type of invoice. So for which type of invoices withholding tax is applicable, that you select. Say standard invoice, that should be available. And by default, all the checkboxes are enabled. You can accept, apply withholding tax and process transaction tax and allow manual withholding tax also. All the checkboxes are enabled. And here you can see calculation point and tax invoice creation point. Calculation point when system should calculate the withholding tax, invoice time or payment time. When you say invoice, validation time, payment means once you just create the payment. Once you complete the payment, it will trigger and it will calculate withholding tax. And tax invoice creation point. When system should create withholding tax invoice with the tax amount, invoice or payment. Ideally, we use invoice only. In few countries, okay, in few countries, it is allowed at payment also. Take example, Italy. Okay, there you calculate and create withholding tax invoice at the payment time. Most of the countries not allowed, only invoice creation itself. And set start date. You can set start date today or past date. And by default, it is enabled. So that means for our business unit, we are enabling withholding tax. And when that withholding tax need to be calculated, and the system should create the invoice with withholding tax amount we specified, then just say save and close. Now create withholding tax code. Okay, withholding tax code. The withholding tax code means with how much percentage tax need to be calculated. With that percentage of tax is calculated, that need to be remitted to which tax authority. The tax amount what we are calculating, we have to remit to tax authority. We have to pay to tax authority. That mapping also we do within the tax code definition itself. We'll see that. Okay. Say tax code. So task name is manage tax codes. So here is the task manage tax codes. Click on go to task icon. Click on create and select our business unit. And country. Okay, the tax code what we are creating, we are going to use in which country for this business unit. Select country, USA. And tax regime code. Okay. So you have to specify, okay, the regime for this withholding tax code. Create. Just it's all about giving the name as a placeholder just for identification purpose. And say Alt INC US withholding tax regime. Same code take as a name. Take start date, today date or past date. Save and close. Now create the tax. Okay, here we have a tax field. Click on drop down. Click on create. Say withholding tax at the rate of 10%. Within the name itself, I'm giving how much rate we are going to define. So start date, today or past date, and provide withholding tax account. So when you calculate the 10% tax, the 10 tax amount need to be posted to which account? Okay, the tax amount need to be posted to which account? System should update the tax amount against which account? Search for withholding tax account. Okay, pick this value. Could be automatic or manual, doesn't matter. It should be a tax account, withholding tax. Set rest as a default. See, these all like which values most of the time we enter same. Those all you can set as a default also. We'll see this after completing this concept. We'll see so that whenever you record the transaction, our job will become very easy. Say okay. Now we are creating the tax with this name. Just for our understanding, we are giving the percentage. System cannot understand this. This is for our understanding. Okay, inside of this tax, we'll enter the percentage. So that tax amount need to be paid to which tax authority? That we have to select. Supplier level, if you select supplier type as a tax authority, only those suppliers will be displayed here. Okay, within this entire system, only these two suppliers are marked as a tax authority. Our supplier is not showing Alt IMC supplier 1 because that supplier type is not tax authority. Only these two suppliers tax authority is selected as a supplier type. Select our supplier. Our supplier is nothing but tax authority supplier. And select site also. Now save and close. Just we are giving the tax name and we are specifying the tax account to post the tax amounts against that account. And if you calculate the tax with this tax name, that need to be reported to which government? Okay, that need to be paid to which government, which tax authority, that we specify. The same tax name you copy, take as a tax rate code also. Now, under rate periods, just click on add, give percentage. Here this 10% we given for our understanding. The system need the percentage in this field so that system can understand and it can calculate based on the value which you input in this field. And provide effective start date, today or yesterday date. Since it's a cloud environments, okay, the time zones slightly could be different. Okay, we can set time zone also. There is separate profile option. So that is reason just I am setting yesterday date. Okay. So done. This is what we have to specify. Now, if you enable the checkbox, create tax classification code, and if you save, the same tax code system will create as a tax group. Tax classification code or a tax group, both are same, we discussed. So creating tax codes, we need to create group or classification. If you enable the checkbox, this tax code itself can be created as a group. You no need to create the group. Okay, don't enable so that we can understand how to create. So say save and close. Okay, we created one withholding tax code. If you want to create multiple, you can create. So as a part of the group definition, you can group all those codes and the group you can assign to the supplier. How many codes are part of the group? Accordingly, system will calculate the tax. Okay. So we created tax code. Now create withholding tax group. To create the group, we have to use the task called as withholding tax classifications. Withholding tax classifications nothing but withholding tax group only. Click on go to task icon, click on create. So you can name it as Alt INC withholding tax group. Select start date and add tax whatever you created. Just click on add, select our business unit. And with this BU, what are the tax codes are available? You can see here. And the same you can select. And just if you want to list out multiple, you can click on add and you can keep adding if you have multiple tax codes which are applicable. Or else just say save and close. Even single tax code you cannot assign to the supplier directly. That should be grouped into tax group. Yeah. Only tax group you can assign to supplier, not individual taxes. Done. Now assign the same withholding tax group to supplier. So this we have to assign to standard supplier. From which supplier we are purchasing or from which supplier we are taking the services. To that supplier we have to assign, not to tax authority. Okay, assign withholding tax group to called as standard supplier. Standard supplier means with which supplier we are doing the business. Now go to supplier page, manage suppliers. Supplier name is Alt INC. Supplier 1. Click on edit. So ideally we have to assign at site level. But if you don't set at profile level, system won't allow us to enable withholding tax at site level. That is the reason first we have to enable at profile level so that we'll be able to set the same tax group at site also. Okay, under profile, go to income tax tab. Select income tax tab. Here enable use withholding tax checkbox so that this field will open. Here select withholding tax group. Withholding tax group nothing but withholding tax classification. Okay. Here is our group. Alt INC withholding tax group. Save it. Now go to sites. Click on edit. Go to site assignments. Now here use withholding tax checkbox is enabled. Okay, it's open to select because profile level we enable. If you don't enable at profile level here, you cannot enable. Okay, and select withholding tax group. Right here. Select. That's all. Say save and close. Save and close. Done. So we completed required setups for withholding tax. Now we'll go and create invoice with our standard supplier. For which supplier withholding tax is applicable, then we'll see the tax calculation and withholding tax invoice with the tax authority. How system will understand tax invoice need to be created against which supplier? When you create invoice with the standard supplier level, we have withholding tax group. Inside of withholding tax group, you have a tax. The tax is already mapped with the tax authority in the tax code creation setup. That's how system will understand. So go to invoice workbench. Okay, call this page as invoice workbench as they given, or you can call it as invoice work area. Okay, from where we perform work that you can call as work area. So from this invoice work area, go to task list, say create invoice. Select our standard supplier. Okay, invoice number 0001. Amount as we discussed 1 lakh. Enter line amount. Select any one of the distribution set. Okay. So we given invoice number, invoice amount, and line information. Now go to invoice actions. Click on validate. The moment you click on validate, as per our configuration, system should trigger withholding tax calculation or tax invoice creation at the time of invoice. Here invoice means validation is the trigger point. Click on validate. Now system will identify supplier site level withholding tax group is applicable. It will calculate and it will show here as well as it will create withholding tax invoice. If you want to see withholding tax information, scroll little down. So it calculated withholding tax 10,000. We given 10%, 10,000 it created. If you see total invoice amount is 1 lakh. The due amount is only 90. You have to pay only 90 to our supplier. Okay. Here go to taxes. Select withholding taxes. You see. So rate withholding at 10%. This is a tax code name and this is the actual rate and how much amount is calculated. And calculation point is invoice, nothing but validation point. And it belongs to which tax regime and tax name and tax jurisdiction. Okay, jurisdiction automatically this system will take. Okay, our tax, the name automatically. Okay, US withholding tax 10%. The tax name it is taking and country it is prefixing. It is setting as a prefix. So that's how it creates. So that's how you can just calculate the withholding tax. Now it is showing withholding tax is 10,000. Now if you want to pay for this standard supplier, it will allow you to pay only 90. You cannot pay more than 90. It is picking only 90. Remaining 10 is deducted that we have to pay to tax authority. Now we'll go and see with this 10,000 withholding tax is created with our tax authority name or not. Just cancel this. So here you may, yes, you can, it will populate the data here. If you refresh the page, you click on the recent 24 hours, 5 invoices are created. Okay, yes, it is not populating. It may take some time, no worries. We'll go on to find out from manage invoices. You search with the supplier name, tax authority supplier. So Alt INC, US withholding tax authority. Search with the tax authority name. You will be able to see withholding tax invoice. Okay, invoice number. Just click on invoice number. You will see the complete information. Again, go to actions, click on edit so that the detailed invoice information you can see. So in this business unit, the withholding tax invoice is created. You see the type of invoice is withholding tax. So supplier, tax authority and site, and you can see description, the withholding tax. Okay, withholding tax. So Alt INC supplier 1. This is related to withholding tax, that is the meaning of the description, and it is created against this invoice. Against this invoice, this withholding tax invoice is created, and this you can update the name. If you want to update the name, you can update. We don't get any invoice from the tax authority. We have to take the initiative to make the payment. Any number you can provide. We may give, maybe if you are paying monthly once, the month name you can give. So that's how you can calculate the, so now this we have to submit for validation. And you will pay this 10,000 to tax authority. 10,000. You may pay 10,000 to tax authority first, later to supplier 90,000, or else you may, as per your payment terms, immediately you may make the payment to your tax supplier 90,000 as per the cycle when you have to pay. So every 1 month or every 3 months once. Okay, what is the cycle is applicable in the country, accordingly you can pay the tax amount. So that's how you can process the payment to standard supplier as well as tax authority with the help of this withholding tax wherever it is applicable. Yeah. So that's all about withholding tax. Done. Now let's talk about concept called as bills payable. Okay, bills payable. Okay, the term bills refers post-dated checks or future dated payments. The bills payable is nothing but PDC, post-dated checks, or say future dated payments. So as per one invoice, you have to pay today. Today is the due date, but you don't have funds in the bank account. So you want to issue the check. Yes, you can issue the check today itself, even you don't have funds in the bank account. So it may take some time for supplier to submit in the bank and it will come for clearing. So meantime, you may inject the funds into your account. Or else, so you will not have any funds for 10 days. In that case, you can give the check with a future date. Just you are going to print the check today, but on the check you will be printing future date. If you are giving payments with a future date, that we call as bills payable. Okay, we call as bills payables or call as PDC or future dated payments. Here, let's try to understand accounting here. The key point here is accounting. Okay, key point here is accounting. So if you take the standard process, invoice creation, payment, and reconciliation, what is the accounting? What are the accounting entries are involved? If you look at standard process, one is standard process, other one is bills payable process. In case of standard process, okay, in case of standard process, when you look at the standard process, when you create invoice means standard invoice. When you create invoice, the accounting entry is charge, or you can call as expense account. Any account you can say, any charge or any expense, both are same. We are talking about manual invoice creation. When you create invoice based on the PO receipt, we'll discuss accounting accordingly. Say charge or expense, any both are same. You can take any one. Say charge account is debit and liability account is credit. So this is the accounting entry when you create the invoice. It could be standard process or bills payable process, any process. When you make the payment, system will create accounting as liability debit, cash clearing is credit. So what is the meaning of charge debit liability credit? Charge means we spend some expense, we are liable to supplier. Okay, we are liable to supplier. We are liable to supplier. And payment creation time, liability debit and cash clearing credit. Since we are paying no more liability, we are reversing the liability. Here it is debit, here it is credited, here we are debiting. Liability credit, liability debit, between these two entries, it would get knocked off. That means we are recording in our system, there is no liability. We are reversing the liability by debiting here. And cash clearing is credit. That means we paid, the check is pending for clearing. Cash clearing means it is pending for clearing. And when you do the clearing, when you do the bank statement reconciliation, okay, when you do the reconciliation of the cash management, or once check is cleared, you can say. Okay, when you do the reconciliation of the bank statement and the cash management, cash clearing account is debit, cash account is credit. What is the meaning of it? So no more it is pending for clearing, it is got cleared. Here it is credit means it is pending for clearing. Here you are debiting means you are reversing the clearing means it's no more pending for clearing. And directly you are crediting the cash means we paid. Check also got cleared. Here if you look at this accounting entry, liability knocked off. Here credited, here debited, cancelled. Cash clearing knocked off. Here credited, here debited. The final entry is we spent some expense and we paid cash. What level we are standing to track all these? We are using this liability account, cash clearing account. These accounts we call as intermediate accounts. So this is the final entry. Okay. Charge account is debit, cash account is credit. Okay. Charge account is debit, cash account is credit. Fine. So these all are intermediate accounts. These all are intermediate accounts. So just these will keep passing the balances from one stage to another stage to understand where the process is standing. Now, if you talk about bills payables process, what will happen? When you make the payment, you are giving the check, but you are going to keep that check for pending to wait till that maturity date. You are issuing the check today. So in the standard process, if you issue the check, liability debit means its liability is reversed. Cash clear is just pending for clearing. Anytime supplier can deposit the check and check can get cleared and they get the amount. But in case of bills payables, you are giving the check with a future date. When you make the payment, the accounting entry would be liability debit. Since you are making the payment, liability debit and bills payable is credit. The meaning is no liability. Okay, we are reversing the liability, but it is not pending for clearing. It is pending for maturity date arrival. Bills payables means so it is pending for maturity date. That is a future dated payment. So it is pending for bills payable. So liability knocked off. Final entry is charge. We spent expense. We given check with a future date that is awaiting for maturity date. Okay. One after arriving the maturity date. Okay. Say after arriving maturity date, we have to create additional entry. It's no more awaiting for maturity date. Already we arrived the maturity date. Say we should check today by printing the date as 15th of John on the check. So say today is 15th of John. And 15th of John, we have to perform some activity to update this accounting. It is no more pending for bills payable. It is no more pending for maturity date. That means we have to reverse bills payable. Bills payable, you have to debit and you have to credit cash clearing. Now it is got eligibility, it is just pending for clearing. Now bills payables will get knocked off, cash clearing is credit. When you do the reconciliation, cash clearing will get knocked off cash account. So this is how, since we are going to keep waiting that check for maturity date, this is how accounting need to be managed in the system. Okay, we'll see that in the system. So this is all about bills payable related accounting. Okay, this is standard process when you create invoice. The expense account is debit, liability account is credit, or call it a charge account. And when you process the payment, liability debit and cash clearing is credit. Liability is knocked off since you are paying, but it is pending for clearing. So once clearing is done in the bank, so that would be that you perform as reconciliation in the cash management. Now it is no more pending for clearing. So final entries, charge debit, cash credit. Here also charge debit, cash is credit. The rest all are intermediate accounts. So this is how we have to manage accounting for standard process and bills payables process. Now, if you are going to implement bills payables, future dated payment process, we have to complete few setups. We have to complete few setups. First, we have to create, or say we have to provide bills payable account in common options. So when you create payment with a future date system required bills payable account, that we have to provide in the common options. Have to provide in the common options. And this account you may provide at supplier site level also. We have seen supplier site level we have. So liability account we have, prepayment account we have, bills payable account we have, but all are optional. You want to provide site level, provide site level. It will take from site or else provide in the common options. And also we need to create one payment method with the bills payables. Create payment method. Okay, create payment method for bills payable. So these are the two setups we have to perform. After that, we'll go and create invoice, create invoice. Maybe with the 10,000 amount could be anything. But for our use case to test this scenario, we'll create invoice with past date. Otherwise, we have to wait for maturity date and all. That would be different. So what we'll do is we'll create invoice with the past date. We create with the 1st John 2024. And we'll process. Okay, we'll process payment on 1st itself. Treat today is 1st. So we'll process, create invoice and we'll process the payment on 1st itself. And when we are processing the payment, we'll keep maturity date as, okay, maturity date 3rd John. And on 3rd John, we have to run one program. Okay. Okay, run bills payable program. Okay. There will be program called as update bills payables maturity program. We'll run that. We'll see that.
But
So
we
what
should also
happens is when you create invoice, this would be the accounting entry. When you process the payment, this is the accounting entry. When you run the bills payables program, system will add this accounting entry to reverse bills payables. When you do the reconciliation, this is the accounting entry. Reconciliation we'll see when we deal with the cash management. Okay. So these are the points we have to understand. So we are creating invoice and we are going to process the payment with the 1st John. Okay, for our use case, so that maturity date is 3rd, today is 3rd, and we can run the maturity program. It will update the status and accounting. Okay. So by default, system won't allow us to process the payments with the past dates. For that, we have to enable one checkbox. We'll see all those. So first set up these account and methods in the system. So go to common options. Go to common options. Okay. So go to common options. Here, look for our BU. Provide bills payable account. The account type is liability. Okay, bills payable. It's a payable only, means liability account. Say okay. Save and close. Create payment method. Task name is manage payment methods. Click on go to task icon. Create. The payment method what we used, what we selected as a default at supplier side, that is created here on. Here only created, and it would be all the payment methods would be available at supplier. Supplier level we selected one method as a payment default, that is check. Now we are going to create separate payment method for bills payables. So I'm just giving bills payable X, or you can prefix or suffix alt inc, but I'm taking the name with this naming convention. Bills payable X. And here there is separate tab called as bills payable. Okay, go to bills payable and here enable bills payable checkbox. Okay, save and close. The maturity rate override and all not required. Done. We created bills payables payment method. We provide bills payables account in the common options. Let's create invoice with given date for our use case for testing purpose. Create invoice with first. So we want to create invoice with the 10,000. And another point, when you create invoice, system will calculate withholding tax. Because for the supplier, withholding tax is applicable. Let's disable withholding tax. Okay. Not required, we tested. Since it's just testing, you can disable. We don't want to calculate again and again, not required. Okay, alt INC, supplier 1. So go to sites first. Site level you have to disable. Profile level if you want to disable or else ignore, no issues. So remove withholding tax group name. Now disable it. Save and close. Okay, if you have profile level enabled and assigned, there is no issue with that. Okay, even if you have profile level under income tax tab, it won't get defaulted when you create transaction. Always system will take from the site only. But site level only we have BU. Here we don't have any BU. Here just you can have, okay, to give the control at supplier level. That's all. This you can remove or you can keep as it is, no issues. Okay, just cancel this page and do create invoice. $10,000. So today is first. Validate the invoice. So if you want to make the payment with the today date, first, it is not possible as per system. Okay, system won't allow. For that, we have to do one setup. Hope you are taking all the points. So go to payment options. Go to payment options. Go to payment options. The payment options for our business unit enable allow payment date before the system date. System date is 3rd. We are going to make the payment before the system date. Enable this checkbox for our BU so that system will allow us to process the payments before system date. Done. Now go to payment workbench. And one more point. You just account this invoice. Without accounting invoice, you cannot account payment. Say postal ledger. It's accounted. Invoice accounting, no difference. Same. The expense or charge account debit, liability credit. Now go to payment workbench or call as payment work area. Go to task list. Say create payment. For which supplier we want to process the payment. Alt IRC supplier 1. Payment date is, say today is 1st. And select bank account. And how you are going to pay? Through check only. But you want to include maturity date. If you want to include maturity date, we need to select bills payable enabled payment method. The bills payables enabled payment method we created. That is bills payable X. Select payment process profile. Select payment document. We selected payment method as a bills payable enabled payment method. The payment method what we selected inside of it, bills payable is enabled. Because of that checkbox which you enabled, if you go to advanced tab, there you can see the same will reflect. Bills payable is set to yes. Now you should provide the maturity date. Maturity date is mandatory for this payment. So we are issuing the check today. Today is 1st. It will be matured on 3rd. Okay. So otherwise, to run this cycle, like to understand the full cycle, we are taking like this. Otherwise, reality, how they process accordingly it will work. To create the use case, we are taking these dates. Otherwise, if you give 10th, you have to wait up to 10th and all. Fine. So done. Now you select invoice and process the payment. And save and close. The document number is 100010005. Now find out the same payment, manage payments. 10005 is the check number. Payment date is 1st. Search. See the status. Payment status is issued. If it is not bills payable, payment status is negotiable. When payment status is negotiable, system create accounting as liability debit and cash clearing credit. If payment status is issued, it means that is bills payable. Just we issued the check, no use. Supplier has to wait to arrive the maturity date. Issued. When status is issued, if you run the create accounting, it will create liability debit and bills payable is credit. Now open this invoice by clicking on payment number. Now go to actions, say post to ledger. Create accounting for the payment. So what is the accounting entry? Bills payables are future dated payment, both are same. So liability debit and future dated payment, nothing but your bills payable account would be here, which you given in the common options. Right? This is accounting entry. After arriving the maturity date, you have to run the program. Say today is 3rd. We'll go and run the program. So go to tools, schedule processes. Click on schedule new process. And here look for update bills payable. Okay. So just search with the bills, you can find it. This is a program name, update matured bills payable status. This is a program. What it will do? This program will update payment status from issued to negotiable. So update the status of matured bills payable from issued to negotiable. Whenever we arrive the maturity date, this program we have to run. Select our business unit. Click on drop down. Alt I and C. So maturity date 3rd. Any payments are available with this maturity date for all those invoices. It will update the status from issued to negotiable since today is 3rd. And rest of information not mandatory. Submit. Refresh. Wait till this program complete normal. So after completing, go to payment work area. Find out the same payment record. Payment date is 1st. Payment number is 10005. Now see the status is changed to negotiable. Okay, that means your program completed. Status is changed to negotiable. If you open this, now it is updating the status as partially accounted. Okay, partially accounted. If you want to view the accounting, yes, we have accounting line liability debit and bills payable is credit. Future dated or bills payable both are same. Now, if you run again create accounting, this additional line it will add. It will debit bills payable, it will credit cash clearing. So for the same payment, since status is updated as negotiable, again submit create accounting. Actions, post to ledger. Again created, now it will add additional line. Okay. So liability debit and future dated payment is credit. This was the initial entry 3 and 4. The new entries, this future dated payment or liabilities debited and cash clearing is credited. Now future dated, or else bills payables knocked off, cancelled. So debit and credit. Final entries, liability debit and cash clearing is credit. Okay. So this two got knocked off. Final entries, liability, cash clearing. So this is the entry system created. This is knocking off this bills payables which are already credited. So this is how just you can deal with the bills payables concept. Whenever we do the reconciliation, the cash management, the final entry is same as standard process also. Cash clearing, debit, cash. That we will see when we deal with the cash management application. Okay, that's all about bills payables functionality. Okay, so we're done for today. Okay, we'll see the same queue, what are the items we have. We'll pick and we'll keep going one by one. We'll connect tomorrow, same time.